A man who is unable or unwilling to say no to a beautiful woman or beautiful women who are sexually on offer is no different than a man who wore the mask, took the jab, bent the knee, succumbs to government tyranny in whatever form it takes today. No different than. Because whether it's a beautiful woman or the government, what it fundamentally comes down to is an inability to say no. Being weak-willed, being weak-kneed, not being the captain of his own ship, being easily swayed off course by outside forces, and thus being unfit to lead because he can't even lead himself. What it comes down to is being unwilling or unable to sacrifice short-term pleasure or comfortableness for long-term profit or gain. What it comes down to is an inability to sacrifice. And sacrifice is inherently masculine. We know this from the legends we have, from the real life heroes that we lionize. Sacrifice is masculine. We lionize men who sacrifice, not saying women shouldn't sacrifice. And very often that means bodily sacrifice. And that doesn't always mean losing your life. That's not my hope for any man. But it can also mean saying no, not being swayed with every beautiful passing shiny object, not going through every single open gate just because it's open and inviting and alluring. That's also sacrifice. That's masculine. Why am I saying this? Well, because there are men, like Andrew Tate, but there are many men who brag about being tough guys, about standing up to tyranny, but then they're promiscuous, or worse yet, they encourage promiscuity in men. And these guys are no better than the guys they condemn, the soy boys who took 10 shots. They really are not. And what these guys, not all men, but what these guys get wrong is they get wrong what it means to be high value to a woman. Now, I don't like the term high value when it applies to people because we all have inherent equal worth in Christ's eyes, but for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to use it. What it means to be high value as a man or as a woman is to be wanted by members of the opposite sex, to be desired by members of the opposite sex. Now, obviously, there are different things for men versus for women that are desirable to members of the opposite sex, but being desired by members of the opposite sex makes you high value. Not saying yes to every member of the opposite sex who desires you, not physically engaging with every member of the opposite sex who desires you. That actually makes you less high value because now you're not rare. Now you're easily accessible. And something that is not rare, something that's easily accessible, something that is common cannot be high value. See, it is true that for better or worse, women typically like a man who's wanted by other women, a man who's high value. However, this is important. Women want a man who's wanted by other women who can say no. To us sometimes as your woman, but especially to those other women. Women are driven to safety with a man, and that includes emotional safety. So it doesn't matter how tall he is, how good looking he is, how wealthy he is. If he's unable to say no to other women and he's taken with all of those passing beautiful things, he's worthless to her. He's not high value. He's actually a liability to her. And socially, you could certainly make the argument that people are harder on women in this arena than they are on men. And I actually think in some ways that's justified. There are real biological reasons for that. But God is not harder on women in this area or in any area. And if that doesn't resonate with you today, I pray someday it does, because your immortal soul actually hangs in the balance. The last thing I'll say is it is foolishness. It is so detrimental to men to suggest that they are unaffected by promiscuity. Men are not robots. Making love is how I'll phrase it for the purposes of social media. It's the most intimate act that two adults can partake in. And men don't give birth, despite what the left says. So it'll be the most intimate act that a man partakes in his life, other than coming out of his mother into this world. Okay? To pretend that men are robots who are unaffected by that is foolishness. They may be affected by physical intimacy in different ways, but they are not unaffected. Even leaving aside emotions or falling in love, a man who spends a great deal of his youth chasing women and sometimes succeeding, chasing that variety and sometimes succeeding, is jacking up his dopamine levels. And he is going to have a much harder time settling down when the time is right with the right woman and remaining faithful to her, because he's jacked up those dopamine levels. And it actually doesn't matter how lovely his wife might be. He's going to have a very challenging time. We do such a disservice to men when we pretend that promiscuity does not affect them negatively, because it actually does. And too many men find that out the hard way, and we should stop that. So a man who is unable to say no to a beautiful woman is really no different than a man who's unable to say no to the government. It is a weakness. It is a liability. And if the government ever comes in the form of a beautiful woman, well then, I guess Andrew Tate and his ilk are really going to be in trouble.